So our special guest today is Joe Scipione. Welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to be here.
Very welcome. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Joe, and how you got started writing.
So I was a teacher for a lot of years. I taught high school for 12 years, and kind of like when I finished college, one of the final exams that we had for one of my college courses was a history course. I taught high school history, and the history course, the final exam was to like do a creative writing project about all of the different things that we had done over the course of the semester. So
Mm.
um, I had always been like a Stephen King fan. I read a lot of horror growing up. And then when I got that assignment, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. It's different than just kind of a regular final exam. And I really got into it. And I enjoyed myself a lot doing that final exam versus the other final exams that we had had. And that's when I kind of said, oh, I think writing is something that I could do more than just the history writing, which I had been doing
Yeah,
throughout college.
brilliant. So what made you go into the horror genre?
Well, I had always been a horror reader, even when I was much younger. In elementary school, third and fourth grade, I had always like gravitated towards horror books, and then I kind of went from like the little kid horror books to Stephen King books. So I had always been kind of drawn toward that as far as reading went, and then I just continued on as an adult.
What's been the most influential authors for you?
Stephen King is definitely a big one. I read all of his books, growing up in high school and then in college, and then whenever he had a new book come out, I would always go to the bookstore like that day to go pick it up and start reading it.
Yeah.
And then Adam Neville is another one that I've read a lot. I've reread a lot of his books also, and he is just kind of a big influence on me as a writer and kind of wanting to grow as a writer and get better.
Yeah. So what's your favorite subgenre of horror?
I don't know. I'm kind of all over. As far as reading, I like to read a lot of different parts of horror. As far as the writing goes, it's more paranormal or cosmic horror. There's not a lot of stuff that I write where it's just, human monsters. I know like that kind of extreme horror. I don't mind reading it from time to time, but as far as writing it, it's not something that I go for.
Yeah. Fantastic. So how do you get your ideas and where do you go from there?
Ideas, I guess, can come from all over. I don't like to just say, oh, I'm gonna look for ideas by reading, but I read a lot. I watch a lot of movies. I'm not a big TV show guy, so I don't really watch TV shows as much as movies. And then I just listen to a lot of music. I take my dog for a walk every day, and I always have something playing. And ideas, I think they just come from anywhere. Like you see something, even if it's like a small detail, like a person out in public, you just see that person and you think, oh, well, how did that person get there? And then sometimes that's enough of an idea for a character. But I think you can get an idea from anything, and even like I said, a small detail, you can look at that small detail and then turn that into a story that way, just by asking what if questions. What if this happened? What if that happened? Or you see something and you say, well, how did that get there? How did that rock get that shape as you're walking by it? And then from there, like a story can just develop from that, I've found.
And do you plot or are you a seat of the pants kind of guy?
I just did a TikTok about this on Saturday because I saw somebody else say that they were a pantser and talking about that. And I think I'm kind of in between. I don't really I'm not going to sit down and write like a very detailed outline for a book. but I'm also not going to go in totally blind and just say this is the start and not have any idea where I'm going. So I think I kind of fall in the middle. I call it scaffolding. I don't know if there's like an official name for it, but I have like for like a longer book, maybe 6 plot points or 8 plot points, and I'd know I'd write towards those plot points. So I usually have a beginning, like an opening scene that I want to write, and then I would just go from that beginning scene to whatever that first major plot point is. And I don't have all of that outlined, but I know, okay, I have to get to this major plot point. And then once I get to that one, then I know the next major plot point is coming up a little bit later. So it's not a full outline, but it's not totally seat of the pants either. It's kind of somewhere in between those two.
Fantastic. So with your characters, do you base those on personal experiences, people that you know?
I think there's probably a lot of people that I've met throughout my life, parts of them that are in some of the characters. And I also think there's a lot of myself in some of the characters. And not to say that any character is just based on me, but some of the characters might think the way I think in a certain situation. And I think that as far as creating characters, when I'm taking those walks that I talked about, that's what I think about the most, is not necessarily the plot, but is more of the characters. And I usually come up with like a character sheet for each character before I start writing anything. And I have a background, even if that background never ends up inside in the book. I know what the characters have done in the past and kind of what's driving them. And if the details that I write on that character sheet end up in the book, great. And if it doesn't, that's fine too, because I know that history, and I know based on the history of that character how they would react maybe in different situations.
Yeah, fantastic. So do you sort of like put a particular theme or a message? Does that sort of like end up in your stories by accident or on purpose?
No, definitely accidental. I won't go into a book thinking, okay, the theme of this is family. My book that's coming up, it's coming out December 8th. It's called Never Dead. And when I started writing it, I didn't realize it was going to have this very strong theme throughout it. But then when you finish it and then you go back and you edit it a million times and you've read it over so many times, you start to see that theme. And so when I was getting ready, to get it published, I started to realize like family and the bond of family is very, very strong in that book. And I didn't recognize it reading it, but then as you go back, it's very obvious that it's there. So that's the first book I've dedicated to kind of my family as a whole, my immediate family, and then all the other cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff, because the family bond in that book is very, very strong. So I don't set out to do it, but I think a theme usually shows itself as you're writing the book.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. So have you added any of your own fears into any of your writing?
It broke up there for a second.
Do you add any of your own fears into the writing?
Oh, a little bit. So I talked about like human monsters and stuff like that. And that's kind of the stuff that scares me more. I have 2 kids. And I think my biggest fear is something happening to them. And so if there's like a kid in my books, usually that would be, you'd see my fears come out in the things that happen to them, because you don't want obviously anything to happen to your kids. And if something is happening to a kid in my book, I usually would think about how I would react in that situation, and kind of focus on those feelings. But in general, like I'm not I don't think about ghosts and monsters and stuff like that too much, but definitely the stuff that happens to kids, I definitely think about how I would react in that situation.
Yeah, brilliant. So with your characters, you said you kind of do like plots on a sheet.
Yep.
Do you base those off any of your own fears? I know you said you sort of like base them slightly on yourself.
Not so much on my fears, but I do, like when I'm creating a character sheet, I think about, how the character would have developed early on in life, maybe like before the book starts, in their history, and how that is going to change them and make them react in a certain way. And sometimes I'll look back on things that happen in my life, or people that I know, things that happen in their life. And if you, especially if you can see like a change in them, or you see them react a certain way, then you can translate that to a character.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. That's brilliant. Thank you. So what have you found that's been the hardest thing about writing a book in the horror genre?
I think it's trying to, like, there's so many monsters and villains that have been done in the horror genre, and I think trying to come up with a different way to show them is, I like it. I think it's difficult, but I also enjoy like that challenge. So I was mentioning Never Dead. It's kind of a take on Frankenstein. And this isn't really spoiling the plot too much because it's in the first couple chapters, but this rich individual, he lives in the suburbs of Chicago, and he goes out with one of his employees, and he digs up a grave. And that's the first chapter of the book. Digs this guy up out of his grave, and the purpose is they're going to reanimate this guy and try to bring him back to life. And then the story kind of revolves around that. So it's a lot of, and I tried to draw on a lot of those ideas that were in Frankenstein, but then the story takes a totally different turn than Frankenstein. So it's not a retelling of it, but it definitely draws on it a lot. And I think coming up with different ways to show those ideas that have been done, hundreds and hundreds of times, is difficult, but also enjoyable.
Brilliant. Now, what's been the most difficult scene that you've ever had to write?
So it's a scene that actually, I have a novella coming out next year from D&T Publishing. It's called Phobia, and it's a scene that actually I cut from the book. One of the main characters in the original manuscript when I wrote it had died, and for whatever reason I got really attached to that character, and writing that death scene was difficult for me. It was I never written longhand before. I always typed, and then this book I wrote longhand. I just wanted to try it and try to do something different. Yeah. And writing that death scene was very, very emotional. I don't know if it was because I was writing it longhand, or if it was just because I got attached to that character. And then I had gone through a bunch of different edits, and I realized that that scene had to get cut. I felt bad that it had to get cut, but it definitely made the book better. But that was probably the most difficult scene to write. I don't know if anybody will ever read it now, but it was definitely difficult to write.
How was it writing longhand? How did you find that, as opposed to writing on the computer?
It hurt my hand. I would sit and write. After a while, I figured out it was about 15 pages was 1,000 words. I think, I can't remember. 15 handwritten pages was 1,000 words. So I could kind of keep track of how much I was writing. And at the beginning, I would get to 8 or 9 pages, and my hand would be hurting, and I'd have to stop for a while. And then as I went on, I got a little bit, my muscles were trained a little bit better, and I could get a little bit further. But I liked it. It was just a lot of work after, because I don't have great handwriting. So then I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what I had written when I was typing it on the computer. And I did get an extra round of editing in, because I was editing as I added it and typed it into the computer. But I couldn't do it, I don't think. Maybe every once in a while I could do a short story that way, but overall, I found out it wasn't for me.
Yeah, you found out that you just couldn't do it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you ever feel remorse on what you put your readers through?
No, I've read a lot of horror. I'm not a big horror movie person, but I read a lot of horror, and I never really feel bad when a character dies, and I look forward to like the twists and the turns and the things that I don't see coming. So when I write, something bad happening to a character, or somebody dying, or something unexpected, I'm hoping that the readers feel they're like, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming, and then move on to the next thing. So I don't necessarily feel bad about it. I like those parts of books, and so I hope that the readers like them also.
Brilliant. So how do you think the horror genre is going to evolve?
I think what I like most about horror in general is that I think there's so much, you can have all of the other genres that we have and that we read in horror. Like you can have a horror romance, you can have sci-fi horror, you can have a mystery action horror book. So I think one of the things that's good about horror is that it just fits into all those other categories also. And you can call something, dark thriller, and it's really just a horror book. Or I think paranormal romance is another one of those labels that they put on books, and it might fit more it might lean more to the romance side, and it might lean more toward the horror side, but it probably fits in both of those. Yeah. And so I think as long as horror continues to encompass kind of all those different genres, it's always going to be around. And maybe the writers will keep pushing the envelope a little bit and see how far they can get. But that's what I like most about horror.
There seems to be new subgenres coming out all the time, doesn't there, really?
Yeah, definitely. So
tell us about your books, Joe.
So Never Dead comes out December 8th. That's my 8th book. So my debut novel was Perhaps She Will Die. That came out in 2020 from World Castle Publishing. And then I have a collection of short stories titled Zoo, 8 Tales of Animal Horror. And that came out from D&T Publishing. And then my most popular book so far is Mr. Nightmare. That came out a little over a year ago from Wicked House Publishing. And then this summer, the sequel to that, Mr. Nightmare 2, The Nightmare Realm, came out. And then I've got a handful of novellas, DK, Justice, and The Life and Times of Edward Morgan.
Fantastic. And where can people find them?
They're all on Amazon. The novellas and the short story collection are all through D&T Publishing. Never Dead and the 2 Mr. Nightmare books are through Wicked House Publishing.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, Joe. So
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.